Hey guys, welcome to this Cinema 4D tutorial. This one's going to be more like a quick tips tutorial because I'm going to be going over a problem with the Xplode plugin and how to work around it, how to fix the problem. So the issue is that whenever you use an image map, like in this case I'm going to be using a JPEG image as a texture for your object, and then you use Xplode to cut the pieces up or to cut the object up into pieces, the texture map gets distorted and skewed about, and it just messes up everything. So all you have to do for this first part is watch. You really don't even have to go through all of this because I'm just going to be demonstrating the problem so you can see it for yourself. So I'm just going to take this cube and kind of make some extrusions here to illustrate the point to everyone. Okay, so here is our cube, and now we want to throw a texture on it. So we say, okay, let's find a texture map. So here I have this 1024 by 1024 JPEG image of a hole. Okay, we'll put that on the cube, and by default it comes in as UVW mapping. Now you notice that the parts of this cube, the polygons, which were unaffected by the extrusion that I made, everything looks really good. The sides, the bottom, this top portion here, everything that was unaffected, even these three polygons here that were extruded inward from the corner are unaffected. But these inside pieces, these new additional polygons that were created by using the extrude tool to make that inner extrusion, now we've got these lines, and basically it's just the texture is being skewed, it's being stretched, and we just don't want that. That really doesn't look good. So a quick way to fix this, and normally it works for me, sometimes you have to go beyond that, but a quick fix is just to change the projection to cubic, and there you go. Now there are some areas that aren't lining up. Like we've got this little piece here that it should be continuing, but it's not. And then we've got some lines here that are kind of looking a little odd, but for the most part it looks okay. Sometimes you can get away with that. Really no one's going to notice it. So we say, okay, now we want to cut it up. So we use Xplode. I'm just going to take the pieces to 100. And the inside material, I'm just going to make it a dark gray color. Drag that into the inside mat. Okay, so we'll click add, and this is where you want to pay attention. Now notice here all of these or the projection, the cubic projection of the material, everything is looking really good. As soon as we click on scatter, just like that, everything is now screwed up. So I thought at first, well, maybe what we need to do is make a set selection and then assign this material to that set selection. Well, I've already tried it with many different variations, and it still doesn't work. It always comes out like this, so that isn't going to work either. So let me get rid of this, and remember Xplode creates a copy, so we can always go back. We don't have to redo all that. So the reason that this is happening is because we need to generate a UVW map or a UV map for our cube here in order for Xplode to cut these pieces up without destroying the texture map. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. You can bake the object. All you got to do here is click on cube or click on your object, go to render, bake object. Now this is the method that I used in my Metroid Prime animation, because I use global illumination for most of the space station interior, and of course global illumination takes forever to render. So what I did was I used global illumination, but I baked it into the polygons using the illuminate here. So you basically what you're doing, you're baking the illumination into the polygon. That way you can turn off global illumination and just your renders are extremely fast. In this case, we were not baking illumination, and all we want to do is just bake the object. Now that's one way of doing it, but for this tutorial I'm going to be using the Bake Texture tag. So we'll just right click on the cube, in this case whatever your object is, go to Cinema 4D Tags, Bake Texture. So we'll start here at the tag and the file name. Now this is just optional. You don't really have to say this because when you bake the texture out, it's going to come up in the picture viewer and you have the option to save it there anyway. So you can either put in a file or a path directory name here to save it. For this, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to use Photoshop, I'm just going to use a JPEG, but you can use any of these types of image formats that you want. The resolution, I'm just going to use the same resolution as the image map. Super sampling, we're not really worried about that. This is for anti-aliasing on the edges and the corners. I would recommend you just leave it at 0 and see what happens. Normally I can get away with it. Sometimes you may have to take it up to 1. It's fine though. Pixel border, I recommend at least 1. Now by default it is set to 1, so leave it at 1. Sometimes you may want to go to 2. In this case we're going to go to 2, and the reason for that is because once we bake this texture on the seams here on this object, there's going to be a very small thin white line. So what we want to do is we want to take this pixel border and take it up 1. That way it will eliminate that. Okay, so we've got all of these. That's fine. Don't need any of this stuff here. Let's go to the Options tab. We're not using a polygon selection. Don't worry about that. No need to evaluate bump. No camera vector. What we do want is color. Optimal mapping. Set that to cubic. We don't want to bake any of this other stuff. However, you can bake all of these different channels if you want to. Go to the Details tab, and for the texture tags we need to take that texture and bring it down and drop it into the link there. Now for those of you that want to bake more than just one image, this gives you the option to bake an image sequence. Now there's really no need to bake an image sequence for what we're doing here because all we want is just one static image to use that's UV mapped to our little cube here. But if you wanted to bake some shadows, maybe you've got a light or an object that's moving that's casting a shadow, or maybe you want to bake some ambient occlusion that's moving around, whatever it might be that's going to require an image sequence, this is where you need to do it. So you can use your current render settings, or you can go in and you can define a custom amount of frames with your frame rate. But for this, we don't need an image sequence. All we need is just one image. So we'll go back to the options, and all we got to do now is click Bake. So it bakes the map for us, and there is our UV map. So I'm just going to save this as a JPEG. Okay, so I saved the image as a JPEG. Close that out, no longer need it. Let's create a new material here. And in the color channel, I need to go find the image that I just saved. So whatever image you just baked out, whatever you named it, we'll go find it. There it is there. And I'm just going to drag that in here to the color channel. And we'll drag this here over to our cube. We'll get rid of that first material. And there you go. Now you'll notice that here on these corners, on these seams, we have these white areas. Now that was the white areas that I was talking about earlier when we were dealing with the pixel border. Now by default it was set to 1. Now we took it up to 2, so if we hit render, you can see now you can't see those lines. All of those lines are now gone. However, if we would have set it to 1, when you render, there would have been a very faint white line around all of these corners and these seams. You would have seen a very faint white line. So in order to get rid of that, all you had to do is take the pixel border up to 2. And as you can see in the viewport, just kind of panning around, you can see like right there, you can really see that white border. However, when you render, it's not there, so don't worry about it. Even though you can see it in the viewport, it's not an issue, so don't get all freaked out about it. Okay, so now we can get rid of that baked texture tag. Everything looks good. Now it's time to cut this thing up and see what happens when we cut it with Xplode. So we'll take the parts this time to 200. We'll take our material for the inside and drop that in, put that in a fracture object, click add, and we'll click scatter and see what happens. Oh, and look at that, it actually works this time. That's because we gave it a proper UV map. Okay, so we can click clear, we can jump out of that, and there is our properly UV mapped cube that has now been cut up using Xplode. So let's see if we can get this thing to break apart real quick. So I'm just going to use a cube for my floor, and the reason I like to use cubes for the floor is because they have volume to them, and if you use a plane, the plane sometimes has a problem catching all of the pieces, and the smaller pieces, even sometimes the larger ones, will actually pass through the floor. So I usually like to use something with some volume to it. And MoGraph tags, rigid body, and the bounce I'm going to take to 0.1, friction to 1. Just going to control click and drag this down to the fracture object and hit play. Before I do, I need to take this up, extend the timeline a bit to 10 seconds versus the 3 so we can actually see this. Hit play, and there we go. Alright, so there you go. I know some people were asking about it. One guy in particular was asking about it. So hopefully this clears things up for this if anybody has ever actually encountered this problem when using Xplode. So there's the workaround to fix the texture problem when using the Xplode plugin. Alright, so thank you for watching, guys. Later.